Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg, very much indeed for calling me. I want to express my appreciation as the Vice Chairman of the All-Party Group to the Chairman for the brilliant way in which he has led off this debate. He underlines that it is an all-party approach, and I think he expressed it with great eloquence and factual backup. And of course, he made the point that we all have a constituency interest in this, and certainly in the royal town of Sutton Coldfield, we recognise that. And I also want to thank his predecessor as chair, the member for Kensington and Baywatch, who I note that the government has now neutered by putting on the payroll. As a former government chief whip, I know exactly how these things work, and it is a recognition of his great abilities that he's now been put on the ministerial non-payroll. Mr. Twigg, the first thing I really wanted to say was to emphasise why it matters, and these points have been well made already. But we are talking here about dirty money, money stolen from Africa and from Africans, money from the sex trade, money from the drug trade. Although Africa is my principal concern, because I believe that development is being held up by the enormous amount of money that is stolen from that continent, the point that he has made about tax is extremely important as well. And after all, the Chancellor in a few days' time will be looking for as much tax revenue as she can possibly get. If she follows the advice that the Honourable Gentleman has given, there is no doubt that billions would flow in to the Exchequer for the reasons that he set out. And the other point about this is that for many years we believed that closed registers was doing what was required. Closed registers enabled law enforcement authorities to, as it were, dip into details of these registers, and in the case of terrorism, for them to get a response within 24 hours. But it was the publication of the Paradise and Panama papers which showed definitively why you have to have open registers of beneficial ownership. Without the open registers, you cannot join the dots of who is doing what to whom. And it's a very important point. And the scales fell from our eyes when the Paradise and Panama papers were published. All praise to the BBC and to the Guardian newspaper for doing that. And they showed precisely why open registers are absolutely essential, which is at the heart of this debate. And let's be in no doubt either that we are talking about the Crown dependencies as well. They may come after the overseas territories in terms of the government's enforcement action, but they are absolutely in the front line of this as well as the overseas territories. And as the Honourable Gentleman said, we're not talking about all the overseas territories. Many of them have implemented or are implementing in good faith these registers. It is just a pity that some of them are not. It's worth making the point also that the UK has big issues to answer on this, because we know from what the National Crime Agency said some years ago that up to 40% of money laundering goes through London, the overseas territories and the Crown dependencies. And that is one of the reasons why David Cameron in the G8 on 2016 made tackling corruption a very, very important aspect of that G8. And Britain can be proud from that G8 of leading the approach and the attack on dirty money. We should remember not only former British leadership on that, but also the fact that we have a dog in this fight as well. The second point I wanted to make is just to emphasise how we got here. The Honourable Gentleman has rightly said that the government gave way because otherwise it would have been defeated. An embarrassing moment for me as a former government chief whip to, along with Baroness Hodge, to be leading that rebellion. But what happened in that act was that we made it absolutely clear that if they did not, the overseas territories did not accept the will of Parliament, then it would be imposed through the ancient and arcane process of an order in council. And we took a legal opinion, Baroness Hodge and I, from some of the best lawyers in the country, from one of the most brilliant former DPPs, Lord Ken MacDonald, which made it absolutely clear that the Westminster Parliament had the right, indeed the duty, to impose an order in council if the will of Parliament was not accepted within the overseas territories. Now, it so happens that the Foreign Office, with that skill and dexterity for which they are famous, interpreted that measure as meaning not that the order in council would be imposed after a year, but that it would be drafted after a year for imposition after another year, thus giving the overseas territories an extra year. Something that was condemned in the House of Commons by two former development secretaries, myself and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and by two distinguished former chairmen of the Public Accounts Committee, my right honourable friend, the member for Halton, Price and Howden, and Baroness Hodge. And it is still not been done. That is where we are now. And so I echo the questions that the proposer of this motion gave to the Minister, that it really is very important that we get a definitive approach from the government to implementing it. The Minister is a good bloke, and he and I have been discussing development matters now for nearly 20 years, I think. And I know exactly what his view is. But I hope very much that he will stiffen up the relevant Foreign Office officials who like to ensure good and harmonious relations and do not like a row. But he must remind them that officials advise, ministers decide, and ministers are the servants of Parliament, and Parliament has decided, as long ago as 7 years ago, why these matters must be now brought to a head. And can I say that I've recently seen senior representatives from Bermuda and the Cayman who, in my judgment, were truculent and disrespectful of the will of the Westminster Parliament. The BVI, as the proposer rightly said, is one of the key countries in this matter who need to accept that all these overseas territories and crown dependencies, if they want the use of the British flag, they want to have our monarch and our laws, they must also accept our values. And I want to end my remarks, Mr. Twigg, if I may, by just quoting three, although the first one has already been admirably summed up by the proposer, quoting just 3 points in this excellent brief, which I hope will be widely distributed from the APPG, backed by Transparency International also, and other organisations too, including Tax Justice, on the impact of financial secrecy in the overseas territories on UK communities. And the point that the proposer mentioned was a Transparency International revelation that at least £5.9 billion worth of suspicious funds have been used to purchase UK properties, an astonishing figure. Secondly, that the Office for Sanctions Implementation found that since February 2022, over a quarter of all suspected sanctions breaches were made using intermediary jurisdictions, including the BVI and Guernsey. And finally, this point, Mr. Twigg, Transparency International's UK research has linked £250 billion worth of funds diverted by rigged procurement, bribery, embezzlement in 79 different countries to our overseas territories, 92% within the British Virgin Islands. And what's more, Tax Justice Network's 2024 State of Tax Justice report shows that countries are losing nearly £375 billion to multinational corporations and wealthy individuals using tax havens to underpay tax, with over £1 trillion in profits being shifted into tax havens. These are very significant figures. They show why Parliament was absolutely right to vote for and implement the 2018 bill to become an act. And they show why today we need to hear from the Minister that his patience is running out and that he will issue the order in Council if the overseas territories do not accept the will of the British Parliament.